Hey, what's up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. We're in the fourth and final video in this series on creating our own Google Calendar event page using the Google Calendar Event API and Netlify functions. Now, last time we set up the Netlify function, and today we're going to write stuff from the front end to query that endpoint that we created and then parse all that data and get it up on the page. It should look something like this, and you might remember last time we allowed the user to actually decide how many events they want to show, and as they drag this, it will actually adjust that accordingly. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So over here on the left, I've got our HTML page that we built out a couple of videos ago. And what I want to do is come down here and everything inside this events container, we're going to add just JavaScript so I can delete all of this. But let me go ahead and grab a sample article right here. That was one of our cards, and we're going to use that in our JavaScript. And then I'm going to come down here and delete all the rest of this, and I'll be right back with you. All right, I deleted all that, and it should look something like this where we've just got a section with an ID of events container. Let's go ahead and open the sidebar now, and I need to jump into our main.js file. Now, this file was already created by Vite when we set up the project. What we need to do now is on page load, actually load events from our endpoint. So let's come down here, let's write a function. We're going to call this load events. Then we're going to pass it a number. We're going to say the max number, and by default, we'll leave it at 8, but we'll allow the user to change that if they want to. All right, now this does need to be an async function, so that way we can just asynchronously load this data, and then we're going to wrap everything in a try catch. So there's our try, and here's our catch. We'll catch the error, and for right now, we'll console.log the error. All right, let's come back up here to our try, and we're going to say we want to grab the endpoint. So we'll say endpoint equals await. We're going to fetch this, and we're going to pass it a relative path here of netlify /functions/cal fetch. And then you might remember last time we set it up to where we can actually pass in a query parameter as well for max results. We're going to pass whatever is in our max to that, all right, which is the thing that we passed in up here. So we're going to actually hit this again when we need to, but for now, we'll go ahead and just load it on page load by coming down here and saying load events. And the first time it does this, it will do 8, but then we can change this as they drag the slider to decide how many we want them to fetch. All right, let's go ahead and save that and then open this up and hit Netlify dev. We set that up last time. And if we did everything correctly, now we should have nothing going on so far. But as we query this endpoint, we should be able to pull that data. So let's go ahead and work on that. So we'll say const data equals await endpoint.json. And then let's go ahead and console log that data that we're getting back. All right, that should show up on the front end. And I see a problem here. This needs to be .netlify, I think. All right, there we go. Now we're getting our data back, which is perfect. And we want 8, which is 8. If we pass in 3, we should be getting 3. Okay, so everything is working as expected. It's great that the Netlify dev environment allows us to do this kind of queries, and we don't have to worry about cores or anything like that. Now, although we're going to be throwing an error if we mess up, so like, we did here when we didn't have that, we had an error down here. There was nothing in the UI to show the user that there was a problem. So let's go ahead and fix that. But whether it's an error or whether we're loading events, both of those are going to come back and be dumped into our events container. So let's go ahead and grab that up top. Container equals document.querySelector. We're going to grab the events container. And I'm almost positive that's what it was called, events container. All right, so there's a dash there, like this. Okay, so now I've got that either way. And now in addition to console logging something, let's go ahead and add in the events container .inner HTML. And let's just add a string here of HTML. And we'll say P, and then I'm gonna give this classes, and these would be Tailwind classes. So we'll say text center, and then text 3XL. And then let's come up with a great message. Let's see, let's do something like screaming cat. Something went wrong. All right, so now let's mess up and see what happens. Hey, there we go. Okay, so something went wrong. So now they know something went wrong. Maybe you want to give them something to do as far as some kind of action or something, but for now, we'll just leave it like that. All right, otherwise, if that's not the case, then what I want to do, so if it actually hits the endpoint correctly, we get data back, then I want to actually process those events. We're going to write a map function that will take this data and parse through it. So const, let's just call this processed events equals data.map. And we're going to take the event, and we're going to pass it to a function we're going to write called map event object. That's a bad name, but it is what it is. All right, so we've got this here. And then let's come up top here and let's write that function. So we'll say function map event object like that. And this is going to take in some kind of event. All right, now what I want to do is let's just first of all console log the event itself. So I've got that, and all these objects here are telling me everything I'm getting back from the calendar API. Now I don't need all of these things to parse through, so what I'm actually going to do is kind of cut out what I don't need and just reserve what I do. That means at the very end of this function, I'm going to be actually returning a new object from this map. And so this thing is going to have several things. And if we look down here, we can see the kinds of things we might want from our event. The first thing I'm going to want is a name. And this will be the event.summary. And if I come over here, you can see that right here. This would be the name itself. It's called summary in the API. And then I'll say description will be event.description. And again, if I were to come back up this way, you could see that description. So it's actually going to give me a description if there is one connected to the event. We're going to do the same thing here for location, and this will be event.location. And then start will just be equal to start date. And that will be a date that we're going to actually process up above. And then we'll also have an end. That's an end date. And again, that will be something that we process up above. Then we're going to pass a date range that we will generate up above. And finally, we'll have a link to the event.html link. And you can see that HTML link right over here. This is the actual link to the calendar event, so they can click on it and look at it if they want to. All right, now we do have some work to do because we've got to process all of this. All of these come by default in the API, but these three things we're actually going to have to kind of manipulate to get it to look like how we want it to look. Now, the reason we're doing that is because sometimes we're going to have events that have start times and end times, and other times we're just going to have all-day events, and depending on what data you get back, it changes kind of how that API looks. Well, let's see if we can't find some of those just so you can kind of see what that might look like. So if I come down here, you're going to see this one has a start time, so it's going to give me start date time. All right, so that gives me the exact time it's supposed to start. Let's see if we can't find one that doesn't give us that. All right, give me just a second. Let me find one, and then I'll be right back with you. All right, right up above here, actually, I think is one of those. And you can see here under the start, I don't actually have a date time. I just have a date because it doesn't actually have a time. It just has a date it starts and then a date it ends. That end date is up here. So in other words, this is an all-day event with no start or end time, and this is how the Google API sends that back to you. So we need to basically account for that and decide how we're going to display that in the UI. So let's come up top here, and before we return all this, let's say const start date, which is the thing we're eventually going to pass down here. I want to pass that event.start.date time. Now that's only going to be present on events that have actual start times. So we're going to actually use a ternary here and say if that's present, then what I want to do is pass this date to another function we're going to write. Now the reason we're having to do that is because the item we're getting back isn't exactly processed. In fact, if I come back down here, you can see that this is not what I want to display in the UI. So I need to find a way to basically process that. So let's write a function called process date. We're going to pass in a new date with that item.start.date time. So that's if it exists. If it doesn't exist, I want to do something very similar, but here let's do the other half of the ternary. Instead of passing a date time, you'll remember on this one, it just had date. So that's all I'm going to pass in. That's the thing we're getting back from the Google API. And if that's a little confusing, let's just space some of this out. As long as you don't put semicolons or anything, you can set these ternaries like this. So we're saying if this exists, go ahead and process it like this. If it doesn't exist, process this instead. So we need to write that function of process date. And we know it's going to take in a date. For now, let's just console.log the date. All right, and I say we've got a problem. These should be event, not item. And then it's going to yell at us because we don't yet have this, nor do we have this. So we'll get around to that. But now you can see we're getting these back just like this. And even the one that's a full event, the full day event here, I think it's this one right here, we're getting back, and it looks very much the same. So now let's go ahead and process that. And what we're looking for is, right now at least, we're looking for the start date or the start time. So like 7 p.m. or whatever it happens to be. And just like down below, we're actually going to return an object here as well. So I'm going to pass back a month, and then we're going to pass back a weekday, and then we're going to pass back a time, and then we're going to pass back a date. Now, obviously, we need to actually process this because we haven't done anything yet. So start by passing date, which is the thing that we passed in .getMonth. Like that, we're going to need to process this a little bit more, but for now that should work. And then same thing here, we'll say date.getDay. And again, that should work for now, and we'll add some more to that in a second. For the date itself, we're going to say date.getDate, like that. Now this time is going to be a little bit more complex, so let's comment this out for now. Just so we can see exactly what we're getting, let's come back over here to start date, and let's console log that, and we'll refresh. All right, so now what we're getting back is this object right here that we've gotten from up here that has a month, which is the first month, a weekday, and then a date. Now, if you remember in the final project, what we actually want is the name of the month, the date, which we're getting that day already. And then I also want like whether it's Wednesday or Thursday to show right here, and then a time. So that's what we're working on right now, is kind of manipulating this data to get it to look how we want to. Now, there are plenty of NPM packages that let you do this, but it's not that hard to do yourself. And anytime you can cut out and kill some dependencies, it is a good day. So let's kill some dependencies together. So let's start with the easiest thing and then move on to the harder things. So the easier thing will be getting these to say January or Wednesday or whatever. We'll pass this to get month, which will be a function that we're going to write, and that will pass back the day of, or the name of the month. And then down here we'll say get day of week, and this is another function we're going to run, and we're passing that raw number here to this as well. So let's write both of these, and these will just be, let's just do little arrow functions to keep them nice and short. We know we're going to be getting a month into here, and as an arrow function, we're automatically already returning with the syntax we've got right here. So let's just add in an array, and I've just typed in the first 3 letters of each of the months. And then we want the index of the number that we pass in, that month that we pass in. So we'll just pass it like that. Now, the way this works is January is 0 index because it's an array here. So this 1 is telling us February. So it's going to actually look up this right here because we've passed in which index we want. Now, if I save it, we're going to get an error because we haven't done the day of the week yet. So let's go ahead and do that as well. And it's going to look very similar. So we're going to say const get day of week. And once again, we're going to pass in, let's pass in a weekday is what we'll call it. And again, we're just going to have an array. And so you don't have to watch me type that. I'll just do that and then pass in weekday here for the index from that array. And now you see automatically we're getting February and then whatever day or weekday it is. That means the only thing we have left to do is then actually process the actual date. And of course, get it up in the UI, but you know, that'll come. So while we're writing helper functions, let's go ahead and write a few more. Let's write one little one here that says is AM. We'll just be passing in an hour and basically saying if the hour is less than 12, then pass back true. Let's write another one called get hour. And this one we're going to be passing in an hour. Basically what we're going to be doing is converting from 24-hour time to 12-hour time. At least that's the way I'm going to display it here on my calendar events. So I'll say the hour, if it's less than or equal to 12, then just pass the hour back. Otherwise, the hour minus 12. So if it's like 13, that would be 1 o'clock. So 13 minus 12 should give me back 1. And then finally, let's do one more called get minute. And again, we'll just make this an arrow function and we'll have a minute here. And here what I'm saying is if minute, if that equals 0, and you'll see why this is important in a second, then just go ahead and pass back a double 0 so that I have like 7:00 rather than 7:0, which isn't really a time. Otherwise, just pass back the minute. Now, if you're wondering kind of what these things are, it's basically just a feature of the font that I'm using called Cascadia Code, where you can enable these ligatures to make it a little clearer what's going on. That's why you get these 3 double lines like that and this. It's the same thing, though. It's just typing it like this and putting those together. It's just that my font stacks them up and makes them a little bit more noticeable. All right, let's come back down to our process date, because now what we need to do is get several things and basically pass that down to this time right here. So let's comment this time out. We'll say const time equals, and this time is only going to exist on those things that actually have times associated with them, those events that actually have starting and ending point times. So we're going to construct what this looks like up above here. So we'll say const hour, first of all, is going to be equal to get hour, which is that little helper function we wrote. And we're going to pass it date.getHours, which is a method that lives on that date that's coming into us. And once again, like we kind of did up above, this is going to be ternary. If that equals nothing, then we want the hour to point to the Boolean false. So in other words, we are getting back, hey, there's no hour associated with this. Otherwise, and let's space this out again just to make it clear, we want get hour date.getHours. So if it's an all-day event, we should get back false from this hours. Otherwise, we should get back the actual hours, whether that's 8 a.m. or 1 p.m. or whatever. Now we've got the hour, let's go ahead and now get the minute. Here we're going to say get minute. We're going to pass this to our little function of date.getMinutes. Once again, if this happens to be 0, which would happen on like an all-day event, rather than passing back just a single 0, this little helper function is going to pass us a double 0 instead. Now we've got one other thing to worry about, and that is a time suffix. Because we're converting this from 24-hour to 12-hour time, we need to basically know, is this AM or PM? So here what we want is actually a string of HTML that'll be small like this. And I put this in backtext because in the middle of this, we actually want to write a little ternary. What we're going to say here is that if is AM, and passing it here our date.getHours, which again is a function that lives on that date, a method that lives on that date. If that equals true, then, and let's space this out again, I want this to pass back AM. Otherwise, I want it to pass back PM. Finally, let's put this all back together here in our time variable. And this will say if hour exists, so in other words, if it's not an all-day event, then I want you to pass me back a string. And this string is going to have multiple things. It'll have my hour, and then a colon, then it will have my minute, and after the minute, it will have our time suffix of either AM or PM. Now, if we did this correctly, this property here of time should now have all of these things when we save. And you see now that's what we've got. Feb, Wednesday, 5:30 a.m., and it passes it in just like that. Now, I am noticing one thing, and I think it's that we're actually getting back a time for our all-day event. So let's come back down this way, and let's actually console log the event up top here too, just to make sure that I'm seeing that correctly. And I think it's this one, otherwise I'll look around and be right back with you. All right, and it wasn't, it was this one right here. And you can see here I'm actually getting a start of just date with no time, but down here I'm actually getting back a time of 5 p.m. Now the trouble is we're actually passing in right here just the date itself, even though this isn't really a full date string. So what I need to do is come in here and in backticks, I need to pass that, and then I need to tack on the end of this a time. So we're going to just say it's 0000. Now if I save that and refresh, I think that should take care of it. And you can see now I'm getting back Monday. Number one, it's the right date because I think it said earlier it started on Sunday, and then I'm getting back false for the time, which is true. I don't want to actually show any time if it's an all-day event. All right, we did all that hard work. Let's go ahead and erase that and that. And if we kind of use this as a list, we've got two other things to do, the end and then the date range. So we've got the start date, and the end date is going to be very similar. I'm actually going to, let's just copy this down instead, and we're going to set this end date here. We're going to change all of these starts out for ends, and then let's console log this down here. And you can see, because we set it up right the first time, now it's all working here as well. And even on that all-day event, we're getting false so that we don't have a time coming back, just the date itself. All right, perfect. So that's one more down, and we can comment that out, and everything should still work. We've got the final one there of date range. So const date range is what we're looking for. And here we've actually got a little bit more complexity. So I think it actually might be easier to set this as a let statement, and then we'll just write some if statements right here. And basically there are three possible things we could get back. If it's an all-day event that lasts multiple days, then we want to say it goes from like February 9th to February 12th or whatever. And then if it's a single date, and then if it's an event with a start date and a start time, and then an end date and an end time, we want to actually show that in the UI. So those are our three options. So let's write an if statement to handle those. So we're going to say if start date dot date. So the object up above here we got start date. If it has the property date on it, that does not equal, first of all, end date dot date. And that not equal is just a bang with two equal signs afterwards. Again, it's just that my font converts it to that. If that's the case, then I want date range to now be equal to, and in backticks here, we're going to have start date dot month, and then we'll have start date dot date, so the actual day of the week, and then we'll do an end dash here, and then copy both of these over, and here we just need to change these both to end date dot month and end date dot date. So the first thing we've checked for is this a multi-day event? And if so, all we want are the dates. That's it. The next thing we're going to check for is, let's say it's not a multi-day event. So that could either be a single all-day event or an event on a day. So we'll just say else if it does not have a start date dot time. Or we could do end date dot time. It doesn't really matter. Basically, it'll be false if it's a single all-day event. Then we want date range to just be equal to this right here. So just give us the single day that it occurs on. And finally, as our conclusion here for probably most of our events, that will be normal dates. We're going to say date range. So a normal event with a start and date time. What we want is the starting date's weekday. So we'll say start date. And remember, we had a property we added on that called weekday. And then we'll do a comma. And here we want the start date dot time. And then another in dash. And here we want a end date dot time. All right, now we can save that. And let's jump all the way back down here. And what I want is to take this processed events here, and I want to console.log that. So now we've got our 8 events, and these are all processed and ordered as we'd want them to be. And you can see here, this one does not have a description. This one has an end date, a link, a location, and a name. And then we have a starting object here that says February 9th, and then gives us the exact time and the weekday. And again, we've got an end object up here that does very much the same thing. Let's come down to the one, let's see, this vacation to Moab, I think. So this end date, you'll notice, has a time of false, and the start time also has a time of false. So all that is coming back to us properly. What I'm not seeing is our actual processed time, and that's because our date range here, we never added that. All right, so let's do this one more time. Look back in here, and now we've got our date range here that's going to say Wednesday, all that stuff for a single day event. But down here on our multi-day event, it's just going to have February 14th through February 17th. I realize some of this is kind of hard to follow, but what we're doing is basically processing this data and manipulating it to kind of do what we want it to do. Now that we've got all the data we actually want, let's add this back to the UI. So down below here, rather than console.logging, what I want to do is update the events container.innerHTML. And here what we've got above is an array, this processed events. That's what a map will pass back. And so we're going to actually map over that array again. So we're going to say processed events.map, send them through a map itself. We're going to pass 2 things. We're going to have the event, and then we're going to pass the index too, which you can always pass if you need to in a map. We're going to pass each of those to a function we're going to call create event. And again, we're going to pass that the event and the index, and then we're going to join them like that on nothing. And the reason we're doing that is because, again, map sends back an array, and we want this to be HTML. So we actually want to join it all into one large string of HTML and then dump it into the DOM just once with our insert HTML. Now we need to actually write this right here, create event. So let's come up this way. We'll say function create event. And you'll remember it takes in an event and it takes in an index. We'll just call them E and I. That works. Then inside here, I'm going to actually paste in that HTML that I had on my clipboard from way back when, and we're going to return this. And what we need to do is actually add in our text all throughout this HTML that we're generating. So let me show you what that will look like, and then rather than you watching me do all this, I'll just speed it up because it's kind of the same thing over and over again. So the first thing I need to do is come into this feb, and I'm going to replace this with my E for event dot. And you'll notice there all those properties that come on that custom object I created now show here. So what I want is start.month. And if it's an all-day event or anything else, it'll actually, either way, will actually show here. And now what I'm going to do is actually go through each of these one at a time and add these. And I'll show you which ones I've done at the end, but it's basically any of the things that you need to be custom to each card. So let's do that, and I'll do it quickly and then kind of show you after I'm done. All right, so I'm done with the basics here. And as you can see, I've added in the month, which is what I did for you, and then the date, and then we have to add the date range, and then an actual link to the event itself, and then this is the H2 of the name. And if I scroll back down, we've got the description as well, and then the link one more time. Now there's one other thing I want to fix here, but I'm noticing that we've got an error. So let's figure out what's going on. Create event up there. Okay, so its problem is down here. And I think you see the problem. I didn't have another parentheses here. So what I need to pass is both of these things. And then this is the whole function create event. So now if I save this, that should fix it, but it doesn't. All right, so something's going on. Well, the problem is still this map function. And let's see, I think, yeah, I fixed it with something that wasn't the problem. So I don't need that. What I actually need is to map it like this and then join it on the end of that. Okay, there we go. So now we're actually getting in all this stuff, and you can see we've got a few things we need to work on. So for instance, we've got seed details even when there's no description itself, and then we've got all these automatically expanded, so we need to work on that as well. And the other thing is nowhere do we actually show where the event takes place. And we do have that. We have the location itself. So that might be worth actually displaying somewhere as well. And then we need to create those randomly generated colors on the fly, which you don't have to do, but I thought it was a nice touch, and it gives me a chance to show you one more thing about Tailwind. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back up top here, and let's work on a few of those. So the first thing is let's copy this down and put the location right here. So e.location. And when we do that, you see we've got it right here showing that we've got Denver, Colorado, New York, New York. It gives us an actual address here. But some of these don't have them. So we're going to have the same kind of problem we've got on these descriptions that are also not showing. So let's do this. Let's wrap all of this, and we're just going to add on the front of this e.location. If that exists, then in a template string once again, we're going to add all that. And let's copy this or move this down just to make that a little clearer. Otherwise, let's just have nothing. So now if we save that again, these actually have the locations, and then this one doesn't have anything because it doesn't have a location. And that's actually the exact same thing we're going to do down below here as well. So let's see, on this description itself, we're going to have the same thing. Now, this SVG right here is that little arrow, and so we don't need that or these C event details. All that we don't actually need if we don't have that section. So it's this whole area right here that we're going to put a string around, or this these brackets around. And we're going to ask very much the same question. So we're going to come in here, and this time it's not e.location, but description. So if that exists, then here in backticks, let's go ahead and add this whole string. Otherwise, we're just going to have an empty string. All right, and now that's what we've got. Now, I am seeing that we're getting some weird spacing. So let's just add like div right here. And because of the grid parent, I'm thinking that'll give us enough spacing. Maybe not quite. The nice thing is because we've got Tailwind pointing to this, we can just say like height of 6 or something like that, maybe of 4. And we can actually just add classes in here, and Tailwind's watching this, and so it can add that in there. Now there's other ways to fix that, but I think that'll work for now. Now you may also want to adjust some of this spacing, like get these dates or these locations looking a little bit different, but I think that'll work for us. There is something else we need to pay attention to though. We've got all these IDs and ARIA labeled by pointing to the exact same thing for all of these. That's why we actually passed in the index. So what we can do is on this button 1 here, I'm going to grab both of those with Command-Shift-L. Just on that section, we're going to pass in the I. That'll be the index of the event. So like 0, 1, 2, 3 or whatever. And then let's do the same thing on the details. And again, Command-Shift-L. And then backspace here. And we'll just have an I like this. All right, now that I've got that, we need to find a way to collapse these. And I don't exactly remember how we did that. ARIA expanded false. That should be right. All right, so I think what we actually need to do is add a hidden class right here. And that will hide it by default. And then we can just toggle this grid on, based on whether or not this ARIA expanded is equal to true or false. So we actually need to write an event listener for that. And then we've got 2 other things as well. We've got to do an event listener for this slider and then randomly generate these colors. So let's kind of do those one at a time. I guess let's save the cosmetic for last and get the functional working first. So let's come down here, and we need to write a couple of event listeners. Now, it may be tempting to write the event listeners for those buttons, but if you'll remember, as soon as this JavaScript loads, none of those buttons will be on the page. So we actually need to do it off the event containers. So the event container here, we're going to add an event listener here, and we're listening for a click. And we definitely want to get the event so we know what we've clicked on. And then what we need to see is the thing we clicked on, does it have certain attributes? So what we're interested in is if e.target, so the thing we clicked on, not the event container necessarily, but whatever we click on, if it has the attribute, and what we're looking for is ARIA expanded. So if it has that, then what we want to do is first of all say e.target.setAttribute ARIA expanded. And we want to set that to kind of depending on what it is. So either false or true, and we just want it to be the opposite. So let's do another ternary here. We're going to do e.target.getAttribute. Again, we're going to get that ARIA expanded. And if that equals false, we want it to be equal true. Otherwise, we want it to be equal to false. So in other words, just flip that ARIA expanded. Next, I know that inside that button itself that I've clicked on, I'm going to have an SVG. So I'm going to say e.target.querySelector, and I'm looking for the SVG tag in there. And I want to say class list.toggle, and I want to toggle a class called rotate 180. And again, this is a Tailwind class that'll just rotate that 180 degrees. And then finally, you might remember that on that button, we've got both a grid, which is display grid, and a hidden class, which is display of none on there. So all I want to do is toggle that hidden class. So I'll say e.target, and this time it's not the thing I clicked on, but it's its sibling, which is that paragraph of text. And I want to say next element sibling. So just kind of going over in the DOM tree.classlist.toggle. Now, if we did this correctly, I should be able to come in here and click on this, and it should swap that around. You see it's actually spinning that, and then all that shows. Now, just to make sure we did this correctly, you'll notice that I'm even getting it if I click on the SVG, and that's because we set its pointer events to none. If you don't do that, then you can actually click on the SVG accidentally, not the button, and so it won't be able to find an SVG inside the SVG because it's already an SVG. All right, so we're set there. So we got that going. Next, let's work on this slider here. And this one will actually be quite a bit easier. All we need to do is basically grab this right here, and I don't remember what we called this. Input range, event amount. That'll work. So I'm just going to write document.querySelector. This is the only time we need this, so we can just write it right in here. That's event amount dot add event listener. And what we're listening for this time is a change because it's a range itself. And what we're going to do is just pass it our load events. And I do need the event itself. Actually, let's do this. So let's grab this here. And let's just console.log the E. And that way we're just making sure that everything's working properly, and we can just work right off of that. So you can see it did change. So we get a whole object worth of stuff. All right, well, now what I want is actually the value of the range itself. So actually we might need to grab this up top. Let's do that. Let's do events amount to fetch or something like that. And then what we can do is pass it, and we can get rid of these brackets here. We can just pass it load events, and we'll pass it events mount to fetch dot value. All right, now we need to actually declare this, and let's just do it up top. And that was called event amount. All right, so if we did that correctly, it should allow us to basically slide that and decide how many events we want. There we go, 1. And it's hitting our custom API endpoint and basically passing it that max results option. And we go up to 20, I think is the most we allowed to have. Now, we can actually change that if we want by just going to the HTML and coming over to our range. Where's that right here? And setting the max to like, I don't know, 60 or something like that. And now they should be able to slide it all the way and get 60 events and pull all of those in. So you can actually set how many you want them to get. I'm just going to leave it at 20 as the max. Now those all pull in. Now I think by my eye, that leaves us one final thing we need to do, and that is to kind of randomly generate these colors. So let's come back to our JavaScript, and we're going to actually write one more helper function up top here. Because what I want to do is get a random number. So I'm going to say get random number, or how about just num between? And here I'm going to pass it two numbers, a min and a max. And here I'm going to say math.floor. So I want an actual index is what I'm wanting back. And we're going to use this to basically pull a random index off an array of color options. So I want then math.random multiplied times here max minus min plus 1. And then on the end of this, I want to add back on my minimum. So even if it's 0, it'll add at least back on my minimum. And essentially, this is just a little helper function that I don't know, I've written so many times, but basically what it does is it will allow you to get a random number, a random index between two numbers. And it can be either the minimum or the maximum anywhere in that zone. All right, so we've got that ready. Let's kind of come down here. Let's see, I think it's going to be on our create event. Yeah, right here. The first thing we need to do is give it certain colors that we're going to use. And so what I'm going to actually do is pass it a string of colors from Tailwind. All right, so I pasted all of those in, and you can copy those here or add whatever ones you prefer. And then what I want to do is for each card, I wanted to decide what the color scheme should be. So I'm going to say const color scheme equals, and what I want is my colors array, and the index I want to pass is a get random number. So I'm going to say anywhere from 0 to my colors.length minus 1. Because it's 0 index, that's basically the full length of that array. That means I should be getting back one of these just randomly every time. So let's console log this just to make sure that's working as we expect. So console.log and pull that in. Okay, let's pull this up and we should be getting, yeah, blue, indigo, whatever. All right, so cool. So we're getting what we want. Now you might think, well, what we could do is just basically add this. This is a template string after all. And so I can just switch this out. So here I could come in here and say color scheme and it will work. Well, it won't, right? And the reason is Tailwind, so far as I can understand it, needs to actually see the full string to realize that that's what you're wanting to pull. Now, maybe they'll change this at some point, but that means we need to actually give it some kind of safe things that it's always going to generate no matter what, because we know we have a chance at always using them. And you can actually force Tailwind to always spit out certain classes ready to be used in your Tailwind config. So let's come back over this way, and I'm going to open that up. And just below this content, we're going to actually add in an array called a safe list. And I've just pasted it in here, but you'll notice that it's got blue, amber, rose, indigo, and pink, which are our 5 colors. And then I've got them for the background, and then I've also got text, and I've also got a ring, and I've also got a shadow. And I'm basically saying I want you to generate these classes every time, even if you don't see them in my HTML or my JavaScript or anything else. Now, you don't want to make a practice of doing this regularly or for like most of the classes in Tailwind, because that's kind of the whole point, is it only exports what it absolutely needs. But in something like this, where we know we are going to be randomly generating these, and we're going to need them basically on every page load, we can go ahead and say, hey, make sure these are ready, because they're not going to be written plainly anywhere in my HTML or CSS. Now, if for some reason we had written these somewhere else in the UI, they'd actually already be ready and it wouldn't be a problem. But because we don't really have anything else on this site, then we have to actually tell it to generate these. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Let's save this, and I'm going to jump back over this way, and you see it's already kind of working. Just this right here, now it's actually grabbing this, and it's already been generated by Tailwind, so it knows what to do with it. Now, all I'm going to do is go throughout the rest of the document and change out these buttons, change out the shadow, and I think the ring as well. So let me do that. And if I scroll all the way down here and just grab this next indigo, what I can actually do is hit Command D to grab the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And for all of these, I'm just going to paste in that color scheme. Now, if I save it, everything should update automatically, and you see that it's pulling in the right shadow color there for like yellow or blue or this rose or red color, and all that's working dynamically. And again, I can just move this in and out, and it will just randomly do it every single time. And because those Tailwind classes are ready, now I'm ready whenever I generate one of these. And if I refresh here or turn my system to dark mode, you see that we're also getting the dark mode theme coming through. So everything is working correctly, but there is one little UX UI thing that we can improve on. You'll notice that when you load, there's actually a blank screen, and then everything pops in at that point. Now, I recently did a video on my channel showing how to do a loading animation, a custom SVG animation. And so that's actually what we're going to do, but we're going to use Tailwind to basically accomplish the same thing. So I'm going to come over here to Tailwind, and we're going to look at different effects. So let's say, I think it's something like animation, maybe. There we go. And they've got some different animations for spinning. So we'll use that. And then let's see what else we've got. Pulse, I think, as well. So we'll use all of those. And you can see here, they've actually got something very similar to what we're going to do right here. So I'm going to jump over. Here is the link to that code pen that I already did. I think it was earlier last week. So I'm going to grab all of this right here. And let's see, let's actually grab the container too. And we don't need to write our own custom styles because we're just going to use Tailwind to do that. Then I'll jump over here, and inside this events container, I can just paste all of that. And then let's jump back up this way, and I'm going to change out, let's see, this container here, this class, for a bunch of things. So flex, gap, we'll have a text blue 500, so it looks kind of similar to the rest of our theme, and that should work on dark or light mode. And then the other thing we need to do is, let's see, let's change the spinner here. We're going to set a width and height with a class. So here we're going to say height of 5 and width of 5. And then we'll change this. We'll also add to this, I guess, animate spin. And that's our animation class from Tailwind. And I can remove this width and height here. That shouldn't matter. And let's see, I don't need a class on this except for opacity. Opacity of 25. And so it'll have a lower opacity on the circle, and then the path itself will actually add a class on this. So we'll say class opacity of 75. And then I'm going to set the stroke width here of 4 and 4 here. And then lastly, let's come over here and say loading events like that. And then let's add a class here. And we're going to add several classes actually, a text center, text 3XL, and animate pulse. So the actual text will be kind of animating in and out of opacity. So if I come back over here and reload, you'll now see I get a little loading event spinner showing up there. And actually, let's change this. Actually, let's change it up here. Let's change this to like 8 and 8. And let's actually put a width on this, just because otherwise we get kind of a weird janky loading when it first loads. So let's say something like, I don't know, like 20, something like that. And then you see now that loads that way. And maybe we can change this actually to 10 and 10. And that should all load and look a little bit more realistic. And that lets the user know that if there are events still to come and it's just loading slowly, that there are events on their way. Finally, let me leave you with a reminder that you can make improvements to this. There are a lot of other things we can do that would be better maybe than even the way I've done it, or just addition to how I've done it. And there is a community improvements branch, and I really do mean for you to do pull requests and stuff like that, and for us to build something better together than we could separately. I hope this project was a lot of fun for you. It really was for me to put it all together. There are a lot of details that go into this, so if you've made it this far, especially if you've been coding along this whole time, if you could just leave a comment in the description, and why don't you just put the number 4? And that'll tell me you've watched all 4 of these videos, and that'll be our kind of signal to each other. Of course, thank you so much for watching. If you can like the video, that'll be a big help to me, and I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding.